Kickstarter campaigns pretty much always ship late. Back in late 2012, a CNN article had made the rounds saying that 84% of Kickstarter's top projects shipped late. A 2022 research paper by Sieuwert Van Otterloo found that only 30% of projects are fulfilled or delivered on time or with less than a 6-month delay. That means that 7 in 10 shipped more than 6 months late. That's an overwhelming majority. Okay, so what's going on? Why is it so hard to ship these campaigns on time? Why do even the best managers and manufacturers and marketers and moguls and mavens have trouble getting these products shipped out? Well, there's no way around it. Supply chain management is complicated, especially on crowdfunding campaigns where you're never entirely sure how much you're going to be raising in advance, and therefore how much inventory you'll end up producing. But I'm getting too far ahead. I should probably introduce myself before we go any further. I'm Brandon Rollins, Director of Marketing at Fulfillrite. I've actually launched a couple of campaigns myself, a couple of different board games, the first being Warco, which is a card game, and the other being Tasty Humans, which is a kind of puzzle board game, kind of similar to Tetris. Now, these were small projects done on an absolutely shoestring budget, but they managed to ship out on time. Not because I'm a super genius, I can tell you that I'm definitely not, but rather because some very nice and very patient people steered the early 20s version of me away from some very common pitfalls. And now what I want to do is return that favor, but this time to you. Now, as for the company Fulfillrite, we ship orders for e-commerce and crowdfunding campaigns. We've been in the business since 2010. We've shipped thousands of Kickstarter campaigns and crowdfunding campaigns, and we would be happy to help you do the same for yours. Go to fulfillrite.com/open to request a quote today. The quotes are always free, and they come with no obligations whatsoever, so don't be shy. If nothing else, you're going to get some good information on pricing, which is really useful when you're just getting started with crowdfunding. Okay, so with all that said, you're here to learn about the common crowdfunding mistakes, and more importantly, how you can, not make them. And when it comes to mistakes, 3 common ones immediately come to mind for us. 1. Setting an unrealistic timeline. 2. Mismanaging freight and customs. And 3. Fulfilling too many orders or picking the wrong fulfillment partner. Now, over the course of this video, I'm going to talk about each of those mistakes, and I'll talk about why they're mistakes in the first place. I'll talk about what happens if you make these mistakes, and of course, I'll talk about how you can avoid making these mistakes. So let's jump right into mistake number 1, setting an unrealistic timeline. Okay, so why is this a mistake? When you launch a crowdfunding campaign, most of your attention is going to go into the campaign itself. You need to make a product and build your audience and ultimately raise a lot of funds. Now, it's very easy to forget about what comes after your successful funding, or to treat it as a sort of abstract concept that you'll figure out later. That's a mistake. But on every major platform, it's either a norm or a requirement to post a timetable on when you think you will deliver. So creators make their best estimates on how long it will take to actually produce the goods and get them into their backers' hands. Now, if you don't account for all the steps that go into making and shipping products, what you'll end up with is you'll get that timeline wrong. And that means ultimately your backers will have unrealistic expectations and they'll get frustrated with you when you don't meet them. Frustrated backers are not just a minor PR issue that could give you trouble in the comments section or maybe on social media. Backers are your potential superfans. They are the ones who are going to be most likely to stay with you in campaign 2 and 3 and 4 and beyond. You don't want to alienate them early on because you could actually be driving off potential revenue for years down the road. So if you want to avoid this mistake, the first thing you need to learn is how to set a realistic timeline. So after your campaign funds, there are usually 5 things that need to happen in this order in order to get the products into your backers' hands. 1. payment processing. 2, manufacturing. 3, freight. 4, customs clearance. And 5, order fulfillment. Now the trick here is to make sure that you give adequate time plus a little slack to each step in the process. A delay at any stage can disrupt the rest of the process. You can't ship orders until they clear customs. You can't clear customs until the freight arrives. And you can't ship out that freight in the first place until the manufacturing is complete. To set a realistic timeline, what you need to do is gather as much information as humanly possible to fill in some of those blanks. Okay, so for example, check out your crowdfunding platform and see how long it takes for payments to process. Now for Kickstarter, which is very common, it usually takes only about 2 weeks. You'll also want to ask your manufacturer how long manufacturing is going to take, including for any stretch goals that you might end up adding at the end of your campaign. Now take whatever figure they give you and add about 25% to their time, just in case the factory is slow to produce, which happens sometimes. You'll also want to go to Freightos or another freight marketplace like that and go get a freight quote and see how long it's going to take to ship your goods. Take the estimate provided and add about 25% to the time again. Make note of the mode of shipping that you're getting a quote for. You don't want to use an air freight estimate if you actually plan on shipping by sea, because air freight, for example, is a lot faster than sea shipping, and it's not close. For customs clearance, see if you can find some products in your niche and check the campaign updates to see how long customs clearance took for them. For products without a whole lot of regulations where customs fees are paid promptly, it might only be a week or 2 for you to get through customs, but it can take much longer than that if the regulations are more involved for you. Customs agencies have the right to conduct exams on items imported from another country, and they might be applied randomly, so don't lowball your estimate on customs clearance. Finally, for order fulfillment, you need to factor in the amount of time it takes to receive items, store them in inventory, get them in packages in the mail, and then time for the mail carriers to actually do that final mile of delivery. Your order fulfillment center, if you're choosing to work with one or multiple, can help you figure out how long that should take. But you need to make sure that you tell them that you're going to be running a crowdfunding campaign. This is really important. Because of the sheer volume of orders, crowdfunding tends to take longer to ship than, say, e-commerce. Whatever estimate they provide you with, make sure you add another week or 2 to it, just in case. Now, when you've got all of the estimates ready, what you're going to need to do is add them together, and that will help you figure out when you can realistically expect to have your product delivered. Even with all the slack built into your timeline, the complexity of the process will mean that your likely best case scenario is going to be shipping on time or slightly early. A middling scenario is going to be shipping on time or say less than a month late, which is honestly still really good on Kickstarter and similar platforms. If you follow this process, even your worst case scenarios are likely to fall under that 6 months late cutoff the 70% of campaigns just cannot meet. The other key piece here is setting expectations with the backers. So let's talk about how to set expectations. Okay, so the truth is, if you have gone to the trouble of making a detailed fulfillment timeline, you're already well on your way to setting those good expectations. After all, when you publish your estimated delivery time on the page and in updates, backers will see reasonable figures, and they're not going to get another optimistic figure kind of anchored in their mind to mislead their expectations. And that'll avoid the problem of people waiting by their mailboxes for the thing to be delivered. The only additional thing I'll say here is just don't make it too obvious that you are padding your timeline. The ones who know how this works, they can probably see that you're using a conservative timeline. But most folks don't and really have no reason to understand how complicated the supply chain can get. You don't need to hide the fact that you're using these risk-averse estimates, just don't draw attention to it. That's the only thing. So with all that said, let's talk about another place where crowdfunding campaigns tend to go wrong. Mistake number 2, mismanaging freight and customs. So why is this a mistake? Oh boy, this is one of the hardest things to understand when it comes to crowdfunding because, well, people just don't deal with freight and customs on a regular basis. You have no reason to. The last time the public really paid attention attention to freight shipping was when that one boat got stuck in the Suez Canal. You probably forgot about that before I mentioned it. There are two big parts that you need to keep in mind here. The first is getting large quantities of products from point A to point B, and the other is getting large quantities of products cleared to enter their destination countries. Now, if you get the first part wrong, what's going to happen is your goods could take forever to get where they need to go. If you get the second part wrong, it could actually be worse. You could end up paying a ton in taxes, or they might take forever to clear customs, or they might never clear customs at all and end up getting impounded because you're not complying with the regulations of the destination country. Now, like I said, this is probably one of the hardest and scariest parts of the entire process. Okay, so let's start with how to handle freight. There are two ways you can book freight. You can either hire a freight brokerage firm or you can use a freight marketplace like Freightos. Either way, you're going to want to get a quote and a shipping time estimate as soon as you can. Either way, you or someone you're working with is going to need to answer a whole bunch of questions about your products, which will include: how heavy are they? What is the tariff code? Is it hazardous? Do you have a customs bond? Should you ship by sea or air? All of these questions depend heavily on what exactly you're shipping. You'll need to figure out the answers before you launch your campaign because these will affect your shipping time and quite possibly the regulations that your products are going to need to be subjected to. Again, the key here is to find a freight broker you trust or a freight marketplace that you like and get that quote early. Doing this is going to give you a price and a time estimate, and it's going to help you ward off some of the problems before they arise, simply because you will just be aware of the requirements of shipping. So that also brings us to the other half of this common issue, which is going to be how to prevent customs clearance issues. Okay, so customs clearance comes down to answering two questions. 1, can I get permission for my goods to cross borders? And 2, do I need to pay taxes to do that? And if so, how much? You need to set aside money for potential taxes and make sure that your goods comply with all the rules any of the countries that you plan to import them into. There are 5 main tasks that you need to do here, on your own or with help. 1, figure out your tariff code. 2, figure out if the item is hazardous. 3, look up the customs fees. 4, set aside money to pay them. And 5, look up all safety regulations and follow them exactly. Now, if you do all 5 of these things, what you can do is dramatically improve the odds that your goods just get right through customs without any trouble. You can't prevent every random screening, but you can at least do your part to comply with the laws and get your paperwork in order. That brings us to mistake number 3, which is fulfilling too many orders alone or picking the wrong fulfillment partner. Okay, so why is this a mistake? All large freight shipments have to go somewhere. That means either a warehouse or a large business or perhaps your home. Now, I've personally done both of these, and I can tell you that once your campaign reaches a certain size, self-fulfillment is probably a mistake. It takes most of a day for an individual outside of a fulfillment company to pack about 150 to 200 orders, even with good software setup and an efficient work pace. And shipping all rewards from home, especially if they're international, can actually be quite expensive. And that's because the rewards have a long way to go. And because private individuals usually have to pay retail or very close to retail postage rates. So it's expensive, it's time consuming, and frankly, it's exhausting to ship your own orders. But of course, you've probably heard horror stories about fulfillment centers, losing orders or causing multi-month delays in shipping as well. And that does certainly happen in some cases. So what's the solution here? In our opinion, there are 2 parts to this. Choosing to get help if you need it, and finding the right help if you decide you do. So let's talk about part 1 real quick. Part 1 is determining whether or not you need help. To make my point here, I'm going to tell you a story from me as an individual and not as a corporate speaker here. In 2016, I made that card game I mentioned, and I had launched it on Kickstarter. Now, in December of that year, I had shipped out about 130 rewards, and it took my brother and I an entire Saturday to make that happen. It was a lot of work, but we managed to pull it off. And here's what went into actually shipping the Kickstarter rewards. You have to either have that freight shipment delivered to you, or in my case, you have to go and pick it up yourself. So for me, there was this warehouse about 20 minutes away from me, right over the state line, and we actually loaded up our 2-beater cars full of about 50 boxes of card games, and they were sagging because of how heavy they were. Drove it back, unloaded all of that back into my apartment, every single heavy box of those games, and then we proceeded to pack the orders and send them to about 130 people. Even using automation to create the shipping labels, we still had to pack everything ourselves. And we had to make sure that the right orders went to the right people, which is actually kind of tricky to do if you're not used to it. Now look, 130 orders, you can get away with this. With 500 even, you can get away with this. That's a one-weekend job for the most part, especially if you've got a friend or two in town. But we strongly recommend you use software like ShipStation or EasyShip to get discounted postage rates if you do decide to do this. Just don't pay retail. But if you find yourself shipping more orders than 500, you probably need to hire an order fulfillment center to help you out. So 2, finding order fulfillment centers. Okay, so when it comes to finding order fulfillment centers, there are 3 things that you really need to do. 1, figure out where you need fulfillment centers to be located. 2, vet each individual company before working with them. And 3, accurate time and cost estimate. Now, if you do these 3 things, you can set up a fast, efficient fulfillment network that doesn't cost much or take a whole lot of time to ship. And you can make sure that every company involved is one that you can trust. So let's take this piece by piece. Figure out where you need a fulfillment center located. Okay, what does that mean? This is kind of a nuanced point, but here's the basic gist of it. You want fulfillment centers as close to your backers as you can justify. So if you have a lot of backers in the US, Asia, Europe, and so on, then you want a fulfillment center in the US, Asia, and Europe. Do this, and what you'll actually end up doing is that it will cost less to send out the individual orders, and the backers are less likely to have to pay customs when they receive the packages. But you need to balance this without having your inventory spread between too many fulfillment centers, because that can be a problem too. Splitting your stock too many ways can drive your costs up. The sweet spot is going to ultimately depend on your niche, so what you'll need to do is pay attention to what the successful folks in your industry are doing. Just know that if you only have a handful of backers in, say, Europe as an example, and everyone else is in the US, there are ways you can ship from the US to Europe that, while expensive for you, don't necessarily involve backers having to pay extra to receive items, or you have another warehouse. It's called DDP shipping, and it's a decent solution in situations where you only have a few orders going to a region. You'll want to vet each individual company before working with them. What does that mean? You want to make sure that each individual fulfillment company in your network that you're working with has a good reputation. So you want to look online, you want to look at other campaigns and third-party review sites and all that stuff. Do they charge surprise fees? Do they have a habit of shipping late? If you do enough Google searching, you can find most of these answers for you, but you might even want to try calling or emailing their clients as well if you can get a hold of their contact information. This process is going to help you eliminate a lot of the contenders already, but you should also try and contact each one individually as well. Do they answer your emails and calls in a prompt manner? Are their answers good? Are they patient and kind? Do they feel like people that you can actually trust with your inventory? You want all the answers to be yes here, because online stories, they don't always give you the full picture. Or maybe to put it another way, the vibe has to be right too, and you got to look out for that. Okay, so the third part's get your accurate and time and cost estimates. Ask each fulfillment center that you want to work with how long it's going to take to ship those orders once received. Ask for complete pricing information, including pick and pack fees, storage, account fees, receiving fees, and postage rate. Now put together a spreadsheet and start comparing costs from one fulfillment center to another. That'll help you figure out what's competitive. And this is complex enough to honestly be multiple videos, but the point is you want to figure out what your campaign needs are gonna be, and don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions and make sure you can trust the companies before you work with them. Do your due diligence here. Okay, so let's wrap this thing up. In this video, we talked about the top 3 crowdfunding fulfillment mistakes that tend to derail campaign. And just as a quick recap what they are: 1, setting an unrealistic timeline. 2, mismanaging freight and customs. 3, fulfilling too many orders alone or picking the wrong fulfillment partner. Don't let these common issues turn you away from crowdfunding though. Getting your product launched is a ton of fun, and it can be a really great way to build a lasting business. When it comes to the common fulfillment issues like all the ones that we've been discussing in this video, the number one reason these mistakes get made by far is because people just don't know to look out for them. Really, that's it. It's just a lack of knowledge on it. But that's not going to be you anymore. Now you've watched this video, you have that information, and you know how to set your reasonable timeline, keep your freight and customs on track, and handle fulfillment with ease. So with all that in mind, if you find yourself needing help fulfilling your orders, go to fulfillrite.com/open to request a quote. The quotes are always free, so if nothing else, you know you're going to get some good information on pricing. And that's going to help you plan out your campaign, which is very useful even early on. Thank you very much for watching this video. Really, really appreciate it, and good luck on your campaign.